My name's Samantha Blake, and I just watched my younger brother get promoted from the other side of a glass door because I wasn't allowed inside. Those words taste bitter on my tongue. Outside the main hall at San Diego Naval Base, the air smelled of salt and hot concrete. The California sun beating down like a spotlight. People in dress uniforms streamed past me, chatter rising and falling in polite bursts. Inside, the low, steady boom of a military band rumbled against the windows, like distant thunder threatening a storm. I'm a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy, 4 stars on my shoulder, years of service in war zones and war rooms alike. I've commanded carrier groups so massive they cast shadows across entire seas. And I've briefed men who hold nuclear codes in their pockets. Yet today, I couldn't even cross a threshold to watch my own brother pin on silver eagles. I stood there, frozen in the corridor. Dagger-shaped box in my hand, a gift I'd spent weeks choosing, while 2 young Marines flipped through a digital guest list and kept shaking their heads. And somewhere in the space between those glass doors, I caught sight of my brother, Michael, tall, square-shouldered in his new dress blues, surrounded by officers who slapped him on the back, who laughed at his jokes, who wore pride like another piece of their uniform. He glanced my way, just once, and then he turned away. And in that moment, I felt something inside me break clean in half. All those years, I'd believed that family ties were unshakable, that no matter how high I climbed, Mike would be there. The kid who used to follow me through the woods on daring backyard missions, who trusted me to be the hero every single time. Turns out I was wrong. I'd seen betrayals in foreign briefings, double crosses written in coded messages, friends who'd flipped for money or power. But I never imagined betrayal would be the look in my brother's eyes, the way he pretended I wasn't even there. Because this wasn't an accident. My name wasn't forgotten from the guest list. I've read too many op orders, too many security manifests, to mistake a deliberate omission for a clerical mistake. This was a choice, a calculated move to keep me out, to keep the event traditional, to keep the spotlight off a woman who wore 4 stars when some men wished she'd just fade into the background. The uniform I wore pressed to perfection. Medals aligned like soldiers suddenly felt heavy as iron. The stars on my shoulders might have opened doors in Washington, but today, they couldn't open that one door. The door between me and my own family. I could have turned around, could have driven away and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But as I stood there, heat shimmering off the concrete, the band striking up the Marines' hymn, a cold certainty settled into my bones. I'm not built to walk away, not from my country, and sure as hell, not from my brother. So I tightened my grip on that dagger box, squared my shoulders, and made a silent promise. This story wasn't over yet. When I was a kid, I believed the world was made of secrets waiting to be cracked open. And the person who cracked them open with me was my brother, Michael. We grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, in a white clapboard house that smelled like lemon polish and salt air drifting off the Chesapeake Bay. Our backyard backed up to a tangled patch of woods, and to us, that might as well have been the edge of the known world. We spent whole summers hidden beneath branches and shadows, inventing code words, drawing maps on scraps of notebook paper, crawling on our bellies through pine needles to avoid enemy patrols. I'd plan the missions. Michael would carry them out, and together we were unstoppable. Even then, the Navy was woven into our bones. Dad, Captain Richard Blake, stood tall and ramrod straight. His voice always just shy of a bark, his medals gleaming under the chandelier light when he came home from the Pentagon. He'd walk in and inspect our rooms like he was sweeping a ship for contraband. Every shoe lined up, every bed tight enough to bounce a quarter. Mom tried to soften the edges. She was an English teacher, gentle but firm, always nudging books into our hands, novels about daring rebels and poets who believed words could change the world. She'd say, Michael, Samantha, remember, strength isn't just in orders. It's in compassion. But compassion was a luxury in a house where discipline felt like a living presence, as real as the family photos on the hallway walls. Michael and I became each other's refuge. No matter how many rules Dad enforced, out in the woods we were free. I still see flashes of it. The sun splintering through green leaves, Michael's freckled face streaked with dirt, grinning as he whispered, "Admiral Sam, I've got your 6. Once he fell from a low branch, hitting the ground so hard the breath whooshed out of him. For one panicked moment, he lay still. I remember dropping to my knees, shaking him, tears burning my eyes. Then he sucked in air and gasped. Did you see how far I fell? He wore bruises like medals. He wanted to be fearless, even if inside, he was just a kid who needed his big sister to drag him out of trouble. We were different, even back then. I devoured stories of naval battles, obsessed over strategy games, memorized ranks and call signs. Michael wanted action, real dirt under his fingernails. The physical test of muscle and will. He loved the idea of the Marines, of being the boots on the ground, of charging into chaos instead of planning from afar. But for all our differences, our bond felt unbreakable. We were the Blake kids. Unshakable, ready to take on the world. I see now how cracks were already forming in those childhood days. Tiny fault lines between who we were and who we were becoming. Because while I thrived under Dad's expectations, Michael chafed against them. While I sought medals and recognition, Michael just wanted space to breathe. Yet through every scraped knee, every reprimand from Dad, every whispered plan in the dark, I believed nothing could ever make us turn away from each other. I carried that belief for decades, even as life pulled us onto separate ships, separate paths. I kept telling myself we'd always be on the same side. But standing outside those glass doors today, clutching a gift meant for my brother's proudest day, I wondered if I'd been wrong all along. Because sometimes the enemy you never see coming is the silence that grows between people who used to finish each other's sentences. When I first stepped onto the tarmac at Naval Station Great Lakes, fresh out of high school, the world felt impossibly big, and I felt impossibly small. My sea bag weighed more than I did. My boots were stiff as cardboard, and I had this relentless, hungry fire in my chest, telling me I was meant for something more. Boot camp hammered me into shape. Sweat, shouted commands, blisters peeling off my heels like paper. But every night when the lights went out, I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, counting down the days until I could stand on the deck of a ship and call it mine. And eventually, I did. The first time I stood watch on the bridge of the USS John Paul Jones. Dawn, breaking over an endless sheet of Pacific blue, I felt taller than any admiral in the fleet. I poured myself into my work, long hours learning radar systems, memorizing fleet formations, writing reports until my eyes burned. I wanted to know every rivet in the ship, every hum of the engines, every echo of boots down the passageways. It wasn't just ambition. It was survival. In those early years, more than one senior officer told me, "Blake, you're smart, but don't expect the Navy to make room for a woman with opinions." I smiled politely. Then I proved them wrong. By 25, I was coordinating anti-piracy missions off the Horn of Africa, my voice cool and steady over encrypted channels, while Somali skiffs closed in on a cargo vessel. By 28, I was briefing rear admirals on cyber threats to the Pacific Fleet. There was the night in the North Arabian Sea when a fire broke out in one of our lower decks. Black smoke churning so thick it swallowed the emergency lights. I dragged 2 sailors out, half-conscious, coughing blood into my sleeve, my uniform soaked with salt and sweat. They stitched my arm up in the infirmary, left me with a scar that curls like a silver ribbon across my forearm. The Navy pinned a medal on me after that. But the real prize was knowing I'd kept my crew alive. While my career soared, Mike carved his own path into the Marine Corps. He went through the crucible at Paris Island, emerged tougher and leaner, wearing that eagle globe and anchor like a brand burned into his chest. He thrived on adrenaline, on leading fire teams through live fire exercises, on earning respect the hard way, one brutal mile at a time. I admired him for that. But as my name began popping up in Navy Times articles, as my face started appearing in Pentagon briefings, I saw the pride in his eyes begin to flicker. It was subtle at first, a tighter smile when I talked about my promotions, an awkward silence when Dad bragged about my latest commendation at holiday dinners. People started referring to him as Admiral Blake's brother, a title that clung to him like sea spray, no matter how far he tried to run from my wake. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that one day he'd see we were both fighting for the same country, just from different fronts. But deep down, I was starting to feel the truth I didn't want to name, that my success was becoming his shadow, and that no matter how hard I tried to pull him into my light, he was slipping further away. And I kept thinking back to those woods behind our childhood home, and wondering if the two kids who'd once conquered imaginary enemies together were still on the same side. The signs were scattered like breadcrumbs, easy to miss unless you knew where to look. At first, it was the pauses in our conversations. Mike and I used to talk for hours, swapping stories about training mishaps, crazy shipboard drills, the quirks of commanding people who'd rather be anywhere else. But over time, our calls grew shorter, shallower. We'd stick to safe topics: weather, football scores, the old neighborhood in Annapolis, any mention of my new assignment, my promotions, my growing influence in the Navy. And Mike's voice would drop an octave, go flat as calm seas before a storm. I tried to pretend nothing was changing, but it was there, in the way he sighed when Dad boasted about my cyber operations team during Thanksgiving dinner, in the way his eyes slid away when Mom showed off my photo from a Navy magazine. One night, a few years back, we were sitting outside Dad's house after a holiday meal. The December air was sharp enough to sting, our breath ghosting in the dark. Mike tipped his beer back, then stared into the bottle as though it held answers. "You ever think," he murmured, "that maybe the Navy was built for people like you, not for people like me?" The words hit me like cold water. "Mike, what are you talking about?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw, not meeting my gaze. "You walk into a room and people listen. You wear those stars and everyone shuts up. Me, I've got to fight twice as hard just to prove I'm not there because of you." I tried to joke it off. "Hey, I've heard your guys talk about you. They'd follow you through hell and back." He snorted, a humorless sound. "Yeah, well, sometimes hell's easier than living in your damn shadow." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words dried up, because a small, guilty part of me knew exactly what he meant. Around that same time, General Edward Grant started popping up in conversations. Old-school Marine Corps brass, built like granite, with a row of ribbons that ran from one pocket seam to the other. He hated change. Thought the military was losing its backbone. He'd made no secret of thinking women in high command were political window dressing, or that cyber warfare was a nerd's game better left out of real combat strategy. At first, I didn't give Grant much thought. I'd dealt with his type my entire career. But then, I started hearing whispers that Mike was getting close to him, joining his private briefings, sitting at his table during official dinners. A mutual friend told me, "Grant likes Mike. Says he's the kind of Marine who knows where the real fight is." I tried to believe it was just networking. Nothing more. But the seed of doubt was planted. One spring, Dad threw a barbecue in the backyard. The grill smoked. Music played low, and the scent of lighter fluid hung thick in the air. Grant was there, invited by Dad, who still respected the man despite disagreeing with half of what he said. At one point, I caught Grant watching me across the lawn, his eyes cool, calculating. He leaned closer to Mike, muttering something that made my brother glance at me, then look away fast. That look cut deeper than any knife. Because I realized that my brother, the same kid who once trusted me with every secret mission, was letting someone else draw the battle lines between us. And in that quiet space between the music and the grill smoke, I felt something shift in the soil beneath my feet. A silent, creeping certainty that we were on a collision course neither of us wanted, but neither of us knew how to avoid. The sun was already high and blazing the morning I pulled into San Diego Naval Base, my car idling for a moment as I stared through the windshield, heart thudding hard enough to echo in my ears. The base buzzed with ceremony energy. Banners rippled in the salty breeze. White uniformed officers hurried across the pavement, medals catching the light, chatter rising and falling like surf on the rocks. Inside my car, it was silent, except for my shallow breathing. I reached over to the passenger seat, picked up the velvet box resting there. Inside was the custom Marine Corps dagger I'd ordered for Mike, the steel engraved with his name and a single word beneath it: brotherhood. I'd picked it because it meant something to us. Because no matter how far apart we'd drifted, I believed some ties couldn't be severed. I was wrong. When I stepped out into the California sun, I felt the eyes on me immediately. A 4-star Admiral in full dress whites is hard to miss. People saluted. Others murmured my name like it was part of a prayer. I nodded back, each greeting precise. My mind focused on one thing, only getting inside that hall to see my brother get promoted. I approached the registration table, where 2 young Marines manned an iPad and stacks of programs. Their faces blanched as I stepped closer. "Good morning, ma'am," one of them stammered. "Name, please." "Vice Admiral Samantha Blake," I said crisply. "I'm here for Colonel Michael Blake's ceremony." The Marine scrolled through the iPad, chewing his lip. A bead of sweat trickled down the side of his face. I'm sorry, Admiral. I don't see your name." My pulse kicked into a faster rhythm. "Check again." I said, "Family section, military VIPs. Both." He tried so hard I almost felt sorry for him. But eventually he looked up, eyes troubled. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on any list." A ringing filled my ears, like standing too close to a jet engine. I forced myself to stay calm. "That's impossible. I'm his sister. Call his staff." The Marine hesitated. "Ma'am, General Grant's office handled the guest list. They were very clear about who was allowed inside." I blinked, stunned by how cold the words felt. "General Grant." "Yes, ma'am." Right then, I knew. This wasn't some paperwork error. It was deliberate. A line drawn in the sand. One I'd been dared to cross. I looked through the glass doors and saw Mike inside. He stood talking with a knot of high-ranking officers. General Grant among them. A faint grin on Grant's face as he leaned close to my brother's ear. Mike must have felt my eyes on him because he glanced over, met my stare for one heartbeat, and then deliberately turned his back. My vision blurred. I had to grip the velvet box tighter just to keep my hands from shaking. "Is there any way to make an exception?" the Marine ventured. His voice barely above a whisper. I straightened my shoulders, every bit the officer I'd trained myself to be. "No. Corporal, thank you for trying." I turned and walked away, ignoring the curious looks, ignoring the pressure behind my eyes threatening to spill over. Outside, the sun felt too bright, too hot. I wandered aimlessly until I found myself at the edge of the marina. Waves slapping gently against the pilings. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp as accusations. I sat on a low concrete barrier, velvet box still clutched in my lap, staring at the dagger's faint outline pressing through the fabric. Inside the hall, the band began to play. Muted brass notes carried on the wind. Anthems I'd heard 1,000 times before. Each one reminding me that the uniform I wore was supposed to stand for loyalty, for unity, for family. And there I was, sitting outside my own brother's ceremony, shut out not by the enemy, but by blood. A phone buzzed in my pocket. I answered without looking, voice raw. "Blake." It was Captain Summers, the base commander. "Admiral, I've been made aware of the situation. Do you want me to intervene? I closed my eyes, the sunlight searing red patterns against my eyelids. No, Captain, not yet. He hesitated. Understood. But for what it's worth, ma'am, you belong here. I hung up and sat there a moment longer, the breeze tugging stray hairs loose from my bun. I wasn't crying. Not exactly. But a single tear tracked down my cheek anyway. Then I wiped it away, stood up, and looked back toward the hall. Because if there was one thing 20 years in the Navy had taught me, it was that battles aren't always won by who fires the first shot. Sometimes, they're won by who refuses to stay outside the door. I found myself pacing the marina's edge, the dagger box heavy in my hand, my reflection warping across the rippling water below. My mind kept flashing images I didn't want Mike laughing with Grant. The way he turned his back when he saw me. The stunned look on the young Marine's face when he realized who he'd been ordered to keep out. I'd been in firefights. I'd watched ships take missile hits and still keep floating. But this felt worse than any combat zone, because there's no protocol for being betrayed by your own family. My phone buzzed again. Laura's name lit up the screen. For a split second, I considered sending her to voicemail, but I answered anyway. Sam talked to me. Her voice cut through the crashing of the waves, sharp and worried. I swallowed hard. I'm outside the hall. I'm not on the guest list. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then an edge crept into Laura's voice. Are you telling me that the Vice Admiral of the United States Navy, a woman with a chest full of medals and classified clearances, can't walk into her own brother's promotion ceremony? Apparently not. I said, my voice raw. Grant made sure of it. Oh, hell no. I could practically hear Laura pacing on the other end. You've given your entire life to this uniform. Sam, you've bled for it. And they're treating you like a threat instead of a sister. It's not about me, I murmured. Though even as I said it, the words tasted like ash. Mike didn't want me there. That's the part that hurts the most. Laura's breath hissed through the line. Sam, you are not the problem here. And if you walk away right now, Grant wins. You think he's going to stop with just this one ceremony? He's going to make you the example for every woman who dares to rise too high. I stared out across the water, my chest tight. A patrol boat cut a white V through the bay, sunlight flashing off its wake. I don't want to ruin Mike's day. You think this is his day? She shot back. You think this is about pride and rank pins? This is about a man who's terrified that your existence threatens everything he stands for. Don't let him push you out. A sharp wind gusted in from the water, carrying the faint echo of the Marine Corps hymn from the hall behind me. Each note felt like a hammer blow. Laura. If I go in there, I don't know what I'll say. Then say the truth. The same way you did when you stood on the bridge of a burning ship and refused to let it sink. The same way you briefed the Joint Chiefs and didn't flinch when they questioned your intelligence. You've never backed down before. Why the hell start now? I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the burn building behind them. I thought Mike and I were stronger than this. I thought family meant something. Her voice softened. It does. But family doesn't mean letting yourself get erased. Not even for the people you love most. A wave slapped the concrete barrier beside me, spraying cold salt water onto my sleeve. I breathed in and let it out slow. You're right, I said finally. I know I am. I could almost hear her smiling grimly. Now go remind them who the hell you are. When we hung up, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked down at my reflection in the water. The 4 silver stars on my shoulders glinted like tiny lighthouses, reminding me of every sacrifice, every fight I'd survived, every inch I'd earned in a world that tried to convince me I didn't belong. And standing there, wind whipping around me, I made myself a silent promise. I wasn't going to let them write me out of my own story. Not today. Not ever. I turned away from the marina, the salt wind stinging my cheeks as if to slap me awake. My shoes clicked over the concrete in quick, determined strides, each step hammering a single thought into my brain. This isn't over. I unlocked my car and yanked open the trunk, hands moving on instinct. Buried beneath my sea bag and a pile of files was my ceremonial dress blue uniform, the one reserved for the gravest moments' funerals. Senate hearings. Moments where you needed your presence to speak louder than any words. I pulled it out, felt the cool weight of it drape over my arms. Midnight blue wool, gold buttons polished to mirror shine, rows of ribbons waiting to be pinned into place. I changed right there beside my car, uncaring who might be watching from distant windows or security cameras. Buttons fastened, creases razor sharp. Every piece of brass exactly where it belonged. Piece by piece, I pinned on my medals the Silver Star, awarded in the Gulf of Aden when I led a rescue mission under enemy fire. The Legion of Merit for dismantling a cyber threat that could have taken down half our fleet. The Purple Heart, earned the night I crawled through smoke and flames to pull 2 sailors out of a burning compartment. As the last medal settled into place, I caught my reflection in my car window, not the woman who'd been left outside the hall, but the Vice Admiral who had fought every inch to stand where she was. I reached into the trunk again, pulled out my citation folder, copies of commendations, awards, and personal letters from officers whose lives I'd changed. I tucked it under my arm along with the dagger box. Then I called Captain Summers. "Captain, it's Admiral Blake." "Yes, ma'am," he said instantly. Voice clipped and formal. "I'm coming back in. I'll use the west entrance." A pause. "Understood. We'll clear the way." I ended the call, slid my cover over my hair, and felt my spine straighten another inch. The walk back across the base felt different this time. The same sailors who'd stared at me earlier now snapped to attention, saluting crisp and sharp, their eyes wide as they caught sight of my full regalia. Some nodded to me with quiet respect. Some whispered my name as I passed. But I kept moving, eyes fixed on the distant outline of the promotion hall. As I neared the west entrance, Captain Summers himself was waiting, his uniform immaculate, eyes fierce. "Admiral, we're honored to have you back." "Thank you, Captain." He stepped aside, signaling 2 Marines to open the doors for me. I took a deep breath, felt the cool blast of air conditioning rush out to meet me, and stepped inside. My heels echoed on marble as I moved through the quiet service corridors, each footfall steady, deliberate. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicked. I was a woman who'd faced down chaos before, and would do it again. I paused just short of the main hall's threshold, listening as the ceremony continued inside. Mike's voice carried over the speakers, steady and practiced, thanking his commanding officers, calling out names of mentors and friends. I closed my eyes, steadying my pulse, because this wasn't about humiliating my brother. This was about reminding everyone, including him, that family doesn't disappear just because someone tries to lock a door. And that respect is earned, not denied. I reached up, adjusted the brim of my cover, and whispered to myself, "Let's finish this." Then I squared my shoulders and pushed open the door. The door swung open, and the noise hit me like a blast wave. The hall was a sea of uniforms and rows of crisp white chairs, filled with faces turned expectantly toward the stage. Brass instruments gleamed under the lights, and the scent of starch and polished wood filled the air. I stepped in, heels striking the floor with a rhythmic echo, the room seeming to contract around me as conversations stuttered and fell silent. All eyes locked on me. Mike stood at the podium, hands gripping its edges, his new silver eagles glinting under the stage lights. His mouth hung open, mid-sentence, as if someone had cut the power to his brain. General Grant, sitting front and center, turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing, lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. I felt the hush ripple outward like a shockwave. Officers shifted in their seats. Cameras clicked as military photographers realized something unexpected was unfolding. I kept moving down the aisle, head high, ribbons flashing like signal flags. The weight of my medals pulled at my jacket, grounding me with every step. Mike swallowed hard as I reached the stage. He leaned toward the mic, voice trembling. "Sam, don't—" I held up a hand, my tone calm but sharp enough to slice steel. "Colonel Blake, with respect, I'll take it from here." A low murmur rolled through the crowd. I turned to face the hall, the stars on my shoulders practically blazing under the lights. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Vice Admiral Samantha Blake, and today, I came here to watch my brother take the next step in his career. I came here as family." My eyes darted to General Grant, catching the muscle twitching along his jaw. And I found out that somehow my name wasn't on the guest list. A few gasps scattered across the room. I swept my gaze back to Mike, my voice tightening. "Michael, you may wear those eagles now. But let me remind you, leadership doesn't mean locking people out so you can stand alone on the stage." He opened his mouth, but his voice cracked. I didn't want this." My voice rose, just enough to fill the hall without shouting. "I stood by you your whole life, Mike. When you fell into the creek behind our house and nearly drowned, who pulled you out? Who covered for you when you cracked Dad's classic Mustang bumper and thought he'd never forgive you?" The audience chuckled nervously, hanging on every word. I continued, softer now. "I've faced enemies across oceans, across battlefields, but nothing prepared me for facing the idea that my own brother would rather pretend I wasn't there." Mike's eyes shone wet under the bright lights. His shoulders slumped. "I thought, if you were here, it would become your day again. Not mine." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Mike, my stars don't erase your achievements. You've earned everything you're wearing. But shutting me out doesn't make you shine brighter. It just makes your world smaller." General Grant stood abruptly. "This is highly irregular." I cut him off, my voice low but deadly. "General, irregular is forcing a sitting vice admiral to stand outside her brother's promotion because of some outdated idea of who belongs where." A silence fell so heavy I could hear the gentle hum of the lights overhead. Grant's face reddened, but he sat down without another word. I turned back to Mike, drawing the velvet dagger box from under my arm. "I brought you this," I said, flipping it open to reveal the Marine Corps dagger glinting under the spotlights. A symbol of brotherhood and of loyalty that doesn't vanish because things get complicated. Mike stared at the blade, chest heaving. Slowly, he reached out and took it, his fingers brushing mine. "I'm sorry, Sam," he whispered. "I let other people tell me who I was supposed to be, and who you weren't supposed to be." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience as I laid my hand over his. "We're Blakes. We don't let anyone else write our story." He nodded, lips pressing together to fight a trembling smile. I faced the crowd one last time, my voice ringing clear. Leadership isn't about keeping people out. It's about standing together, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. And for the first time all day, the room erupted into applause so loud it echoed off the rafters. The applause faded into a low murmur as the ceremony eased into its final notes, the brass section playing a softer tune now, as if the hall itself was exhaling after holding its breath. I stepped down from the stage beside Mike, feeling the vibration of dozens of officers shifting in their seats, conversations bubbling back to life. People started lining up, waiting to shake our hands. Some saluted me so sharply it was like they were trying to erase any trace of earlier doubts. Others gripped Mike's hand, nodding with genuine respect, murmuring things like, "Hell of a stand-up move, Colonel," and "Glad to see family still counts for something." Across the room, General Grant hovered by the exit, his rigid posture belying how rattled he looked. He glanced my way, jaw clenched, but when our eyes met, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. I let him go. That battle could wait for another day. Mike and I moved together through clusters of officers and dignitaries, stopping every few steps as people offered congratulations. Our father eventually pushed his way through the gathering, his face flushed, eyes shining with something between pride and exasperation. That was not the kind of quiet ceremony I imagined. He grumbled, folding his arms across his chest. I shot him a crooked grin. "Since when have the Blakes ever done anything quietly?" He huffed, but a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Mike looked around the room, then back at me, voice low. "I've been thinking about what you said, about building something that's mine, away from all this noise." I cocked my head. "Quantico's still calling to you." "Yeah," he said, exhaling slowly. "I need to prove to myself that I'm not just riding in your slipstream." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Mike, you've never been in my shadow. You've been beside me, even when we forgot how to see it." He gave a small, grateful laugh. "Don't get sappy, Admiral." Then stop giving me reasons to... Around us, the reception continued a hum of laughter, clinking glasses, a few junior officers sneaking glances our way like they were witnessing living history. Someone started a polite line for photos. An aide hustled over, clipboard in hand, asking if we'd pose together for the official record. Mike hesitated, then gave a single sharp nod. "Let's do it." We stood side by side under the bright lights, the photographer adjusting us this way and that. Mike held the dagger I'd given him, its polished blade catching the camera flashes. I rested a hand on his shoulder, the 4 stars on my sleeve brushing against his new silver eagles. And as the shutter clicked, I realized something simple and vital. The Blake kids were still here, a little bruised, a little changed, but standing together, even after the hardest storm either of us had ever weathered. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I believed we'd figure it out, together. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window overlooking the bay, the water shimmering under moonlight like liquid silver. My ceremonial jacket lay folded across a chair, metals winking under the glow of a single lamp. I thought about how fragile loyalty can feel, even when it's built over decades, even when it's blood deep, about how a locked door can sometimes hurt more than any enemy fire. I'd spent so much of my career believing that if you worked hard enough, proved yourself enough times, you'd never have to explain why you deserved to stand in the same room as anyone else. But today reminded me that sometimes the hardest battles happen closest to home, and that silence, the choice to keep the peace instead of speaking up, can become the sharpest blade of all. So, if you're listening, if you've ever felt like someone tried to erase you because your presence made them uncomfortable, hear me when I say this. Your worth isn't measured by who invites you in, or who tries to leave you out. It's measured by the courage it takes to stand your ground and claim your place, even when the people you love are the ones shutting the door. Family doesn't mean surrendering your voice, and respect isn't given freely. It's earned and sometimes demanded in the moments when it matters most. So I'll ask you the same question I've been asking myself tonight. When was the last time you refused to stay silent? Because the truth was bigger than your fear. Because in the end, the stars on your shoulders, the medals on your chest, none of that means a damn thing if you can't look yourself in the mirror and know you stood your ground when it counted.